Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to this press briefing. SustainUS is an entirely youth-run U.S. network for sustainable development. As some of you may know, earlier today, a SustainUS delegate and U.S. youth was ejected from the plenary for speaking on behalf of the actual interests of U.S. citizens about the urgent need for an ambitious and legally binding climate treaty. Joining me here today are three other SustainUS delegates: Remillard, who is the Delegation Policy Coordinator; Ethan Case, SustainUS's Development Director; and Ming Jay Chou, who is the Delegation Coordinator. I'd like to turn the floor over to them, and they'll speak more about our current U.S. domestic position on climate change and what we as U.S. youth are calling for from our representatives in Washington.
So as she said, my name is Remillard. I'm an environmental engineer at Los Alamos National Lab. I'd consider myself to be a pretty average American. I grew up in northern New Mexico, where I attended public school and took piano lessons as a kid. My mother is a Democrat, my father's a Republican, and my own personal views lie somewhere in between. Like most people in my generation, I was raised with a set of values that have helped make the United States a leader in innovation and human rights for generations. I was taught to value integrity, to act with a sense of social responsibility, to ask questions and to draw conclusions grounded in fact. I was raised with the knowledge that I am privileged to live in a country with freedom and legal framework. Furthermore, my parents set precedents for strong work ethic. While they never demanded perfection, they would tolerate nothing less than my best effort. I was taught that mediocrity is not an option. Why is it then that in one of the most critical and complex political negotiations in history, my values and the values of my fellow Americans are not being reflected? The United States, once known for its leadership on the international stage, is rapidly losing its credibility. We've settled for mediocrity for too long, and I find it unacceptable. The U.S. stance lacks a sense of urgency and ambition. The science is clear that unless we have dramatic cuts in greenhouse gas emissions in the next 5 years, it will be too late to reach our 2-degree target. It is almost farcical that we are asking for another scientific review between 2013 and 2015. There have been 4 IPCC reports reflecting the research of hundreds of scientists, not to mention 2 reports in the past 2 years by the United Nations Environment Program addressing the gap in ambition. Even outspoken climate skeptics, such as the UC Berkeley professor Richard Mueller, have acknowledged the reality of a warming planet. We don't need another scientific review. We need action now. Without urgent action, we may not be able to keep global warming in check. Several studies have shown that if we wait to increase ambition until 2020, the rate of decarbonization required to meet the 2-degree target is outside the realm of feasibility. Not to mention, the cost of addressing mitigation and adaptation will grow exponentially. According to the International Energy Agency, it will cost more than 4 times as much to decarbonize the economy after 2020 than if we take action now. It's irresponsible to pass that burden on to my generation. Politically, there's a lot at stake as well. The ideas discussed in these negotiations will result in a restructuring of the world's economies, and the U.S. must remain engaged. Time and again, the U.S. has faltered on their agreements, and confidence in the U.S. is waning. Through the Cancun agreements, we've already agreed to a 2-degree target, and it's clear that with the current level of mitigation, we won't meet that target. We need to show stronger leadership domestically in order to build trust in the international arena. Our country is populated with smart and motivated people. We have numerous resources at our disposal. As a country, we can do better than this.
Thank you, Mario. Again, my name is Ethan Case, and I'm the Development Director with SustainUS. I was born and raised in South Georgia, so I should have turned out a conservative, but I started paying attention to climate change. I am currently studying energy and its relationship with the environment at Duke University. And the more I learn about global warming and energy technology and the path that we're on, the more I'm disturbed by the U.S. position on climate change. and especially domestically. The major problem in the United States is that a minority of Congress a minority within Congress has consistently stalled progress on climate legislation and anything really related to climate change. They've blocked any attempt to set a price on carbon through the cap and trade system. They've stopped any attempt to really come up with any good national energy plan. And these two components together makes it very difficult for any people in the energy sector to even make investments even in a coal plant if they wanted to, because nobody knows what's going to happen in the next few years with our legislation. And this is how it's been for several years now. They're even trying to limit information availability about our energy and our climate by cutting the budget of the Energy Information Administration in key sectors, which it's, even according to Jonathan Pershing, our negotiator, a horrible thing to do. And so really, it's a bad situation. Also, the EPA is under attack in America. The head of the EPA, Lisa Jackson, has been summoned to Congress more times than any other Congress or any other cabinet member in the Obama administration. So that's, I guess, telling, even as we undergo this health care debate, we have the head of the EPA going to Congress to testify more than anybody else. However, there are a few good things. We applaud the senators and congressmen, including John Kerry and Representative Henry Waxman, who have taken a strong stance on climate change. They brought over 50 legislators together to sign a letter demanding an ambitious outcome here at Durban, and we really appreciate that as youth. That's what we want to hear, and that's good climate leadership. There's also been some developments with fuel standards and new source performance standards for power plants that we also like to see. But this really isn't enough at all. This is a much bigger problem, and these piecemeal solutions are just not enough to get us to where we need to go. Decisions about climate are consistently kicked down the road by U.S. leadership. For instance, there was a tar sands debate earlier this year where Obama couldn't make the decision to block the tar sands or to delay the decision, and he chose to delay the decision instead of stopping the tar sands pipeline. And then, we also have problems just doing what the Supreme Court tells us to do. We're required by the Supreme Court to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act, and we're not doing it. So this is also a big problem in our country. And so we're here now sort of pushing the envelope by advocating for the long-term science-based strategic thinking espoused by our nation's top scientists and increasingly military leaders who are concerned about long-term stability and security. And when this becomes more of a radical viewpoint, or when the young people are just scared for our futures advocating this, even after we've worked so hard to elect the president and elect good leaders, something is seriously wrong. And we ask ourselves a lot as youth, have we been duped by this message of hope, by this message that things can change and that there is positive change? And I guess when I personally consider domestic climate legislation as a young person, I can't help but think that. We also want an economy that's just for youth. Right now, we're in debt, both ecological and a major ecological debt and a major financial debt, and we as youth are going to be the ones to inherit that debt. And that's just unacceptable. We want real solutions and real changes in infrastructure that are lasting and not just shifting around of money and no real solutions. And I'd like to end with an anecdote from abroad. I worked for a year and a half in India with a solar energy startup, and I made a trip to Hong Kong, and there was an investors forum, folks who wanted to invest in renewable energy in Hong Kong. And Dr. James Hansen, the top NASA climatologist, was actually invited there to speak about climate change and why it was important to invest in renewable energy in Hong Kong. And what he said was that, he outlined the potentially catastrophic effects of climate change, and then he outlined some necessary actions, and he ended with the idea that we needed a $100 tax per ton on CO2 emissions. And the rest of the room was, the room itself was kind of shocked into silence, except for these few American investors who burst out laughing as soon as he said that. And They were the only ones in the room who thought that this was funny, and their laughter was sort of eerily inappropriate in contrast to the shocked silence of the Chinese investors and investors from Europe as well. And you know, we kind of see that sort of same sense of sort of an eerily inappropriate response to climate change from our government as well. And also here at the talks from our leaders who are pushing for a solution until 2020. It's anti-science, it's bad for youth, and it's unacceptable. And we as American youth demand better. Thank you.
I'd like to also now introduce a video that we've made that shows how serious the situation is and what we as U.S. youth want out of the negotiations and out of our government. I think the video will be playing on the screen here.
On November 4th, 2008, I cast my ballot for the promise of corporate change. On November 2nd, 2010, I voted again for the promise of cooperation and commitment. President Obama, members of the House and the Senate, you postponed progress in Copenhagen. You postponed progress in Cancun. Now, 3 years later in Durban, we are still waiting for American leadership in the fight against climate change. Now more than ever, it's too late to wait.
We need to set aside partisan politics and let science dictate decisions.
We need ambitious reduction targets to lower emissions, not expectations.
We need to help vulnerable communities adapt to climate impacts.
We need your commitment to new and innovative funding and investment in a fair future.
We need to protect water, forests, biodiversity, and the rights of indigenous peoples.
We need a clear roadmap towards a fair, ambitious, and legally binding climate treaty.
And we need it now.
You have the power to perpetuate international gridlock in the climate negotiations, but you also have the potential to usher in an era of innovation, green jobs, and a renewable energy future.
If America takes the lead to guarantee emissions reductions and energy reform, countries will follow.
State borders are not climate borders. The world is your constituency. Citizens across the world are being held hostage by sober negotiations. You must be held accountable to us all.
As youth, we not only represent the present, but the future.
And we believe our future is more than an agenda item or a partisan issue to vote on.
In 2020, we'll be filling your seats at the negotiations.
But by then, it may be too late to act.
We are watching and waiting, but we will not stand as passive witnesses. Next year, we'll be going to the polls again. We'll be voting for leaders who can commit to real change, not empty rhetoric. Keep your promises. Keep our hope alive. 2020 is too late to wait.
Thank you for that. Once again, my name is Ming Jay Chou. I am the coordinator of the SustainUS delegation to these Durban climate talks and a 2006 National Harry S. Truman Scholar. At home in Massachusetts, I work in the budding U.S. solar industry, an industry that, despite the current economic and political challenges, has drawn upon the American spirit of innovation, grown by over 400% in the past 2 years, and now employs over 106,000 everyday Americans. I've seen the potential of green jobs firsthand and their ability to strengthen the U.S. economy. Last year, because of strong domestic commitments, the U.S. was a net exporter of solar goods to the value of $2 billion. Yet one promising domestic industry is not enough to combat the coming economic, social, and moral challenges in the wake of human-induced climate change. It is why I and my colleagues at this table and countless of others around us have dedicated hours and hours as volunteers above and beyond our everyday jobs and studies to organizations like SustainUS that promote greater public awareness about and solutions to climate change. We are not alone. We have come to Durban for the climate change negotiations with nearly 100 other young Americans and the support of hundreds of communities back home. Together, we are engaging with the international community, interacting with negotiators from around the world, and participating as civil society in the official international forum to address and solve the global cross-cutting challenge of climate change. In these past 2 weeks, the SustainUS delegation has collaborated closely with other international youth organizations. Just yesterday, we signed a declaration of cooperation with Chinese youth to foster better understanding and trust between our two nations as we share ideas, resources, and commitment towards sustainable development. We have petitioned with indigenous communities to close forest logging loopholes while protecting domestic and international forests. We are advocating directly to negotiators for new forms of financing to help affected communities and economies recover from climate disasters. We have met with our U.S. negotiators for stronger greenhouse gas emissions targets, only to find them handcuffed to a vision projected by members of Congress back home. A vision so short-sighted that it thrusts a near impossible burden for the next generation of leaders. Because of partisan politics and a House of Representatives intent on obstruction rather than construction, our negotiators in Durban are forced to delay international action on climate change until 2020, even as freshwater sources are threatened, island nations are receding, and drought-scourged farming communities from here in Africa all the way back to America. The world is asking for leadership, and while the American youth has spoken up, our American negotiators cannot listen. In the face of overwhelming scientific evidence, our shared future is shackled by the narrow self-interest of climate change deniers in Congress who would rather gloat over the breakdown of international collaboration than face the truth in science. An entire contingent of our elected representatives would rather hold a kangaroo court on renewable energy than acknowledge that the cost of wind energy is cheaper than traditional fossil fuel energy in many locations in the United States today. In the U.S., certain members of Congress would rather funnel more profits to oil companies than recognize the destruction in livelihood, health, and environment that a pipeline scourging through the Midwest would invite. We have heard from our alleged leaders time and time again that green solutions and innovation will come from our generation if we make our voice heard. Yet when we present the solutions that will drive American progress, we are stalled by the politics of possible instead of the actions of necessity. We are confronted by the pretense of pragmatism instead of the call for ambition. And in short, while we strive to achieve the American dream, we are being undermined by the cowardice and the ignorance of our leaders. In a letter to Secretary Clinton and Secretary Geithner, 53 U.S. representatives have had the courage to call for progress and transparency in the climate change negotiations, but that number is far too small. We ask that others who stand for the American spirit of free scientific innovation, moral compulsion, and leadership in the face of adversity to stand with them on combating climate change. We share Senator Boxer's message for climate deniers. You are endangering humankind. We agree with President Obama's statement that here in Durban, we can grow our economies in a way that's sustainable and addresses climate change, but ask for actual climate action and not empty rhetoric. We echo the 15 U.S. senators who challenged our negotiators to create a strong and ambitious package outcomes from Durban, but ask for commitment, not another round of broken promises. Here in Durban, many U.S. youth are actively working towards a common vision, a vision of climatic peace, societal prosperity, and economic stability that we believe everyone can share. We are asking our representatives in Congress and the White House to call for an internationally binding, science-based greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets before 2015. With 2012 on our doorsteps, we are asking our representatives in our local governments and in Washington for their vote of confidence in the next generation. 2020 is too late, and we cannot wait until then. Thank you.
We'd like to take the last several minutes to field any questions from you in the audience if you have any. And if you could please stand up while you talk, that'd be great. Yeah, go ahead.
Is the
Hold on, there's a microphone coming, I think.
Hi, Jeff Lai of Sustainability. Is that video available on YouTube?
There is. There will be. If you can give us your card, we're going to put it up on the SustainUS website, and you'll be able to get. There's a short clip of Abigail's delivery.
Thank you.
Hi, Alex Stark with the Adopt a Negotiator Project. I was hoping you could just speak a bit more about the young woman who stood up on the plenary floor and spoke this afternoon. Thanks.
Certainly. This afternoon, early in the high-level plenary session, one of the delegates from the SustainUS delegation spoke on behalf of the U.S. negotiators, because we feel that they cannot speak on behalf of the actual interests of the United States. And we are calling again, and she was calling again, for action on climate change, ambitious and urgent action on climate change before 2020.
My name is Adam Greenberg from Long Island University. So as U.S. youth, you represent a lot of people who are really frustrated with U.S.'s position on these climate negotiations. How else do you intend to put pressure on your negotiators, your government domestically back at home as well? And how can groups such as student groups or anyone else with U.S. youth key in on that and participate?
So in particular, we actually have some of our partners at the Sierra Student Coalition right now who have a grassroots effort to push out the message that we've brought here today out to our communities back home. But the work that we do these past 2 weeks at COP are not enough, and we on this table have dedicated our time to SustainUS, but there are hundreds of other organizations back home who are raising awareness and promoting solutions and building solutions to climate change. And one of the most interesting things, and this comes out of the dialogue that SustainUS and other U.S. youth had with Chinese youth, is we have incredibly good access to our local level, not only our local levels of government, but to our state and federal levels of government as well. And we have an important vote coming up, not just in 2012, but in the intermediate votes, we have the ability to write letters to our Congress people and our representatives, and we need to make sure that we are doing everything we can to highlight the importance that this challenge does bring, or highlight the importance of this challenge and the solutions that we can bring.
And I'd also like to highlight something that a former SustainUS delegate is doing right now. He is a young elected official in upstate New York, and he held a call about 2 weeks ago among young elected officials in the United States who wanted climate action. And also on the call were people who wanted to run for office for the specific purpose of encouraging their local communities to take action on this issue. So we're in a unique position in the United States where we can reach out to people who do have this power at the local level, share ideas, and also actually try to get elected. And then I'd also, Adam, like to mention something else. When you said that we represent a lot of U.S. youth here, there are a lot of U.S. youth here. And there's people from Duke University, Yale, UCLA, Lewis and Clark. And all these people are working here towards sort of a climate solution. But they're not working with the United States. They're working with least developed countries. They're working with small and developing states, AOSIS, and there's probably more young people here working directly against the interests espoused by the United States in these negotiations and for other interests than there are total members of the State Department negotiations team here. So that's just something to highlight, that there are a lot of engaged young people here, and there's probably maybe 3 or 4 that are working for our State Department and to articulate our interests.
I think we just have a minute left, so if there's any final questions, we'd love to take that.
Hi, I'm Ramola, and this is not so much a question as it is a comment and a commendation on the wonderful effort you young people have made in the course of this conference, and especially with this presentation today. I'm actually from Canada, but fortunately I suppose I was born in South Africa, so I can claim several identities. I'm here representing a group from Argentina. But it's the young voice, a few Canadians, and now you folk from the United States who have put forward so much of energy to inspire us older folk, and I thank you for that.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Well, I think that ends our time for right now, but thank you so much for attending. If you have any questions, we'd love to meet you guys outside. I think there's a press briefing in this room next, so thanks again.